Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Today we're going to talk about a topic that affects pretty much everyone, chronic pain. We have a guest here that has he's actually changing the way that chronic pain is treated and understood. Brendon Lundberg is one of the founders of Radiant Pain Relief Center. And so I'm just really excited to have him here. Brendon, welcome, Leaders of Transformation.
Hi, I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And thank you to Rebecca Fawcett from the Talent Squad. I like giving credit where credit is due. And she's the one who introduced us to Brendon. So thank you, Rebecca. We appreciate you.
Yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah, and we appreciate you as a listener and the viewer as well, because you're the reason why we do this podcast. You know, Brendon and I can have a great conversation and be like, wow, this is awesome. You know, you're changing the world. But when we share it, and other people get to hear it, what Brendon's doing, then it can inspire you, not only maybe give you some solutions on how you can deal with chronic pain, but how can you become a leader of transformation in your own world? How can you do what you do in a way that actually impacts more people? And so hopefully will give you some inspiration on how you might be able to do that. We're going to talk about crowdfunding and all sorts of stuff. So it's going to be good. But let's dive in and let's start off with Brendon. Your focus is chronic pain. Give us a little bit of a context around that and how you came to be so passionate about this particular topic.
Yeah. Well, when people ask what I do, I typically say that I own a business that's changing the way chronic pain is understood and how it's treated. And that typically elicits some sort of comment like, what does that mean? Or tell me more, because, you know, it's kind of vague. And so, but really every aspect of what we're doing is different than what has existed before, from the science that underlies our approach to how we deliver our approach from a therapeutic standpoint and from a business standpoint. But the pain problem is a huge problem. I mean, first of all, I think pain is both obviously a very literal and very metaphoric subject matter, right? And we use pain, you know, in all sorts of language use, again, metaphorically and literally. And it's a very human common denominator. I mean, there's not a single person who's ever lived on earth that hasn't experienced pain. And in the United States, actually throughout the world, there's more people suffering with chronic pain than cancer, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease combined. In the US, according to a number of different sources, about 100 million people in the US alone. So, I mean, it's a staggering number. We now have this opioid addiction epidemic, which is literally taking people's lives, destroying families, destroying communities. And I think it underscores two important things. The first is this is an urgent problem. We need to approach how we understand and treat pain differently. And we've had a lack of effective and safe therapies in the past. And so, you know, I am honored to be part of a solution that we think can be very disruptive and changing the way that pain is understood and how it's treated, and building what we perceive to be the safest, most consistently effective and appealing solution to this big problem. And really the neat thing about it, and we could talk about this, is not just about minimizing or masking the pain. Obviously, you know, providing relief is what we do, but as clients go through our process, it becomes a catalyst for bigger changes in their life. And it's a beautiful thing to be a part of and a beautiful thing to witness. And that's my why, is to see more people get their lives back, and, you know, to be able to hopefully scale this up and reach many millions of people in the US and throughout the world.
So let's talk about pain. You talk about it being understood. So I know in your book, you talk a little bit about what most people perceive pain to be and where the source comes from, and then where you believe it actually, and where you've discovered that it actually really comes from. And then now you're more dealing with that root cause. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, again, pain is a very common experience. We all have it at some points in our life, and generally we don't like it. I mean, it's not a comfortable experience, right? So we don't like it. We want to mask it. We want to minimize it as quick as possible. But pain is actually really the master teacher, and it's a protective phenomenon, particularly in the short term. Like if you have your hand on the hot stove, or you've broken a bone, or God forbid you have cancer growing in your tissue, you actually want to feel pain in those circumstances because they get your attention and they trigger you to take some sort of corrective action. You know, in that short term, it's pretty clear. Take your hand off that hot stove, stay off that broken leg, go see the doctor, something's not right. And, you know, the pain is intended to keep us alive and to keep us safe. We feel it in our body, in our tissue, in the hand, in the foot, whatever is hurting. But all pain is actually what we call neurogenic, or coming from the brain. The brain, the nervous system, creates this pain phenomenon as a protective function. And that's not science that we've innovated or created or discovered. I mean, this is science that's emerged independently, but most healthcare professionals literally are trained in pain science that was published in the 1960s. They lag behind. They get very little education in medical school or professional school, and very little continuing medical education. What they get is often funded by drug companies, so it's a little bit, frankly, biased towards their approaches. And so, when I say we're changing the way pain is understood and treated, it really is leading first with a level of education. And for healthcare professionals, that becomes valuable because now they have greater understanding and perspective by which they can consult and help their clients and patients. And from a consumer standpoint, when we have our clients come into us, and they've been in pain for years or decades, and they've gone to literally, tens of dozens of places trying to find relief and are still in pain. When we educate them about this understanding of modern pain science being actually a brain phenomenon, then it gives them a sense of hope that maybe there's a way to navigate this if we understand that and can approach it from that perspective. And it's not uncommon to see our clients just start to get emotional, thinking, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not going to have to be confined to these bodies that are betraying me, and that are, kind of, I feel trapped in this body that it's inexplicably hurting. So again, pain is a brain phenomenon, and in the short term, it's protective. But when it becomes chronic, essentially the brain becomes wired to expect and to perpetuate the pain experience. In the book, I make the analogy that we think of pain very cause and effect. And in the short term, again, hand on the hot stove, broken ankle, something like it is kind of clear, like, pretty linear. But when pain becomes chronic, it's not so much that way. And so a more appropriate analogy is actually credit card debt. So I'll walk you through this a little bit. But if I get a credit card, let's say $3,000 limit, and I start using that credit card for routine things that we all might spend money on, gas and groceries and school supplies for the kids, a weekend away with my wife, as long as I paid the bank the minimum payment, or ideally pay the credit card off every month, then I have access to this card and I can keep using it as I want to, right? However, if I allow debt to aggregate on that card, I don't pay it off all the way, and let's say I'm carrying a balance of like $1,500. Now, the car breaks down, and this is a difficult situation because metaphorically, it's painful. I have this car repair bill, a new transmission, let's say it's $1,700. Well, I put it on my credit card. I'm now over my limit. So in addition to the big expensive bill, I'm now have over limit charges. And if I was relying upon that credit card to buy gas to get to work or to buy food for my family because I don't get paid for another 2 weeks, then the circumstance around that has made that even more catastrophic, really. And in this analogy, we think, well, it's because of this dang car repair bill that I'm now in this circumstance. And yes, that was like the tipping point, but it was really an accumulation of other events that preceded this too, that played an equal part into the fact that this is now a very complicated circumstance. And so that's really how pain works, because again, the pain is neurogenic, or coming from the brain and nervous system. The nervous system's primary job is survival and keeping us alive. And so it identifies throughout our entire lives, and probably really from the time of in utero, what it perceives as potential threats to its ability to help us stay alive. So that's injury or trauma or environment or emotion or stress, and on and on and on. And if we're really healthy, then our body has a greater ability to kind of flush these threats or charges to our nervous system account away. But because most of us have high levels of stress, we're not sleeping great, we're not moving great, you're not eating the best food sometimes, on and on, then we're always kind of carrying a bit of this kind of threat debt balance, if you will. And so that's why a simple injury can all of a sudden transpire, kind of like that transmission breaking, and it puts us into this kind of over the limit stage, if you will, of what our nervous system perceives as a tolerable level of kind of aggregated threat on our nervous system. And the nervous system then changes and it says, look, we're in high alert because we're like in overload. And so now sensory input that should be non-painful, like touch or walking or laying down, all of a sudden the brain starts to perceive that as threat. And the result, like the hand on the hot stove, is the brain creating this pain warning signal saying, hey, we're operating at an uncomfortable level. So if you just mask it with a pill, as most of us just tend to do, and as industries kind of taught us to do, and social, society's kind of taught us to do, it's kind of like drinking a 6-pack of beer when you have credit card debt. You feel better about the debt because you're buzzed, but you haven't really resolved the problem, and it may be getting worse, especially if you just put that 6-pack on your credit card. So, educating people about this kind of complicated aspect, and then giving them a path of relief through our therapy that doesn't involve drugs, surgery or side effects, allows us to start to unbundle this kind of sometimes complicated, I guess, combination of circumstance, if you will.
Yeah, and you're really dealing with people's belief systems as well, because there are people that say, well, this is just the way it is. The doctors told me it'll always be this way. I will always have this problem. And here you are coming in and saying, well, actually, we could do something about this, and your pain is actually coming from this, and it's
Absolutely.
resulting this. And my goodness, I'm sure there's a lot of people that would fight you on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the reality is when you hurt, it's harder to move, right? So you're probably going to start gaining weight at some point if you're not as active and functional as you might be. Most chronic pain sufferers, and I have my personal history as a chronic pain sufferer myself, your sleep becomes compromised because your body hurts, and maybe the medications are actually disrupting that and making that worse, right? If you're popping some sort of pill, even the over-the-counter pills, the Tylenols, Advils, aspirins, these types of things can have negative impact, particularly over extended periods of use, to liver function, kidney function, and to gut biome health. And so when those systems start to become compromised, our ability to absorb nutrition and eliminate waste becomes compromised, and then maybe we're gaining weight. And so after years or decades, physiologically, people who are in chronic pain can become pretty complicated. And then you add on top of that an emotional component to this. It's like, this dang pain is robbing me from my best version of myself. I can't work like I want to do. I can't enjoy my life and hobbies, my family. And so then there becomes this other component of an emotional kind of aspect to it. And if you're not able to work, there could be a financial aspect to it, or you're spending money on care, other care costs, or, so it just becomes so complicated. And, I think the reality is, because we have a lag in understanding about pain, in the short term, if you have an injury, you probably do want to stay off it, right? Minimize the use. But when it becomes chronic, if you've kept not using that part of your body effectively, or you're compensating in other ways, then your body it kind of reinforces this expectation of pain, and it exacerbates the problem. Really, the body is made to move, and so it becomes kind of this feedback loop in which a lack of movement reinforces the fact that movement will make it worse. And then because doctors haven't been educated as well as they really should in modern pain science, they're not encouraging their clients to probably pursue these paths of movement and better health like they could. They're just prescribing pills or giving injections and doing other things. And then so obviously it becomes very complicated. And I think when doctors say, you have, Miss Jones, this condition, a herniated disc, arthritis, that becomes a limiter of belief in people's minds that, oh, I have this, so I will always have this, and this is my new reality. But the truth is, we now understand that we're capable to go much beyond these physical diagnoses and live without so much pain and with a higher level of function if we believe that we can do that in part. I mean, there's, the biology of belief by Dr. Lipton. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting things. Dr. Joe Dispenza is another person I really look to as an innovative thinker in this space. And, we're kind of at the confluence, I think, of modern science, technology, and almost this space of getting into people's kind of more psychology and their own belief systems. It's kind of interesting.
So what is it that you actually do? What's your therapy? What's
our therapy? Yeah.
What's the approach?
The primary thing that we do is we have an FDA cleared device that allows us to basically retrain the brain. So it acts like an artificial nerve. We attach electrodes on the skin in proximity to the pain, but actually in healthy tissue. We want to transmit information through the nervous system through healthy tissue that's not painful, but in proximity to that painful area. The device essentially acts like an artificial nerve. It generates a dynamic set of artificial nerve impulses that kind of mimic natural no pain nerve signaling. So we attach electrodes on the skin. The way it's transmitted through the nervous system through what are called C fibers of the nerve system is where chronic pain is transmitted. So as the brain receives these inputs through the central nervous system up into the brain, it interprets it kind of as a natural self-generated nerve impulse, and it begins to ease the pain expectation. The messaging, as I mentioned, is dynamic and changing, so the brain never really becomes tolerant to it. It doesn't start to dismiss it as background noise like it might if it was a static message. Because it's changing and dynamic, the brain is forced to work to interpret this, and that work kind of breaks up the old wiring, or what we call neurotags, that are perpetuating this pain phenomenon, and allow the brain to kind of go through a normalized healing and restoration process and create a more normalized perception of pain through new neural pathways or neuroplasticity. And so in the first session, we can typically get relief. We give the first session for free, but it's really a process of daily sessions for a few weeks in most cases to retrain the brain. And you think about learning Spanish or algebra or how to ride a bicycle, it's a process of repetition and exposure, and much like our therapy the same way. I also just want to mention real quick, there's a number of studies that have come out in the last decade or so that show a high percentage of the population, depending on the age, up to 80% of the population has tissue abnormality. So if someone's thinking, well, I have a herniated disc, so I will always have pain, or I have arthritis, so I will always have pain. These studies are showing that a high percentage of the population actually has those things. They're part of, as we age, our body kind of wears out and these things happen. But up to 80% of the population has some sort of tissue abnormality, like a herniated disc, arthritis, torn meniscus, on and on, but they don't know it because it doesn't have pain associated to it. And conversely, pain sufferers under imaging don't show a correlated presentation of that tissue abnormality that you might think. So they're actually not correlated and connected quite the way that we think they are. When somebody has this diagnosis of a herniated disc or whatever it might be, and they believe that that's the reason that they have pain and that they will always have pain, then we have to help them get past that kind of mental block, because they actually isn't the case. It's really pretty phenomenal, pretty fascinating.
So, okay, what if like in the example you talk about a herniated disc?
Yep.
So that needs care, right? That needs something. So you can remove the pain from it, but if they don't address the actual problem, then so the pain, right, is the signal saying, hey, something's not working the way it's supposed to. So you can eliminate the pain, but what about the actual problem itself, right?
Yeah, well, in the acute pain, like if they've recently hurt their back, then we say, look, you need to let it heal, go through the natural healing process in a short term. That's protective function. But if it's lingered longer than is appropriate, in other words, if it's there for 3 to 6 months or years, as is the case of most of our clients, it's no longer protecting them in a productive way. And so if the brain is sending this expectation of pain, the body's reacting to that expectation, and it's limiting the body's ability to move naturally or to sleep. And it begins probably for many people this cascade of decline, as I talked about a minute ago.
Right.
And so what we want to do is actually tell the body, I don't need to hurt right here anymore. And then it will allow it to move more freely. Blood flow, energy flow, if you believe in that, begins to normalize. And then the body can improve its actual healing abilities. And if there is still herniation or a problem, either they don't care because it's not really painful anymore and the limitation of movement and function is not too great, or it continues to heal and goes away. I mean, the body is a healing machine. It's a remarkably effective healing machine. And sometimes we disrupt that. In fact, even for some of the most modern science about injuries, we were all taught growing up, if you have a sprained ankle or something, you elevate it and ice it and do all these things. And they're now actually saying that icing it and reducing the inflammation immediately prolongs the healing process, because you're limiting the body's natural healing biology to do its job when you're changing that. So the science is all changing in pretty remarkable ways. And I think particularly for chronic pain sufferers, one of the most important things is just getting them feeling better so that they can sleep, they can move, they can have a sense of relief and hope rekindled. And those kind of key things are a huge catalyst for them to be able to reclaim their life again. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I want to just make that distinction. So when listeners are going, well, yeah, but what about the problem? I mean, it's great that you're taking the pain away, but obviously there's still the issue at it. It's interesting that you talk about this, because I recently fell random, and it was just weird because I'm not usually clumsy, but two things happened within days of each other. Fell down the stairs at my friend's place and then fell on her driveway. And my foot, I'm like, what the, okay, things don't come in threes. I rebuke that. And so my foot swelled up, and immediately what do people say? Yeah, you got to ice it. And because inflammation, and so forth. But I'm thinking, yeah, but isn't that the way the body heals? So if I reduce the inflammation, it's exactly what you were just saying there. It's like, well, then the body isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing. So it's just
Right.
interesting how medicine oftentimes and doctors, we're well intentioned,
Sure.
trying to help people to minimize the feelings because we don't want to feel pain, we don't want to feel uncomfortable, we don't want to feel certain things. Um, that's a whole podcast, even just as I'm
Yeah.
saying it, going, wow, okay, so maybe
Yeah.
that's why our range of emotions has shrunk so much. But anyway, but let's talk about, you have a unique model, the way, like you said in the beginning, literally the way everything you're doing is different than it's normally been done.
Yeah.
So you crowdfunded for this, and you're using crowdfunding to advance medical innovation. You are going up against big pharma. You alluded to that.
Yep.
It's big business. Cancer is big business. Chronic pain, big business. All of these. And so tell us a little bit about your approach and saying, okay, here's the problem. I'm passionate about it. I want to be able to solve it.
Yep.
I'm going to do it in a different way.
Yeah. Well, the history is that so this technology that we work with currently, I didn't invent, our company didn't invent, we just licensed it. But I spent a couple of years prior to starting my company trying to sell this technology to doctors, healthcare professionals, and found that because there's a lag in understanding and the science that they understand, it's harder for them to understand its mechanism of action and believe that it works. In fact, I was told many, many times that I was peddling snake oil. Like, this sounds too good to be true. There's no way you can create this kind of relief, because their basis of perspective is so different. And then secondarily, for many, there's an economic disincentive for them to adopt it. If they're a pain doctor, a pain specialist, they're doing, injections and surgical procedures and, routine visits. And that's a pretty lucrative, path of economic return for them. And so this therapy doesn't, generate that kind of income. There's no viable reimbursement, insurance reimbursement for it. So it's all out of pocket. And and then the pattern of use, because it's a daily session for about an hour of time every day for 2 or 3 weeks, that's so different than the throughput model of most healthcare practices and hospitals, like, turn the room 5 minutes and go on the next patient. And so there's a lot of complexity and little nuance that makes this really hard to integrate into the existing world. So realizing this, and having spent previously a lot of time in my career working with doctors and helping them find unique ways to grow their businesses, one of the things that I spent a lot of time with was hearing aids. Hearing aids are not covered by insurance. They're not inexpensive, frankly. And I thought, well, if people are spending $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 for a set of hearing aids, they're certainly willing to spend money to get out of pain if this therapy really works and it's presented to them the right way. And so I began to start thinking about this from the standpoint of not trying to sell it to a doctor and convince that doctor that it was either, the right investment, but how do I make it accessible and affordable to the consumer? Build a business plan around that. And, we spent the last several years really proving and refining that model. So that we can, now be able to scale and grow. And I think the analogy to think about is, if you look at Starbucks, for example, you're like, why are we talking about coffee now? But Starbucks obviously has fundamentally changed the way that most of us, at least in the United States and probably to some degree throughout the world, value and experience coffee, right? The role that it plays in our life has been increased today versus, pre-Starbucks world. And I think it's not because they didn't sell a better coffee product to the local mom and pop diners. They started building stores. These stores created an experience. They created a brand based upon consistency in the operation. They all are the same. They look, feel, taste, operate equally. And that consistency in that brand and that experience allowed them to be able to scale and to become what they want to become. So we've taken a similar approach with what we're doing at Radiant. And instead of trying to sell this and cram it into an existing world, and we've said, no, let's customize and tailor build the right business structure to deliver the most effective care, to create a brand, to create an experience. And by doing that, we've created a level of operations that's much more sensible and efficient. I mean, the cost structure of most healthcare organizations and hospitals is pretty distorted and pretty high. So now we can operate very leanly. We've created a business model that's subservient to the care, so we actually get better care outcomes, and we can create consistency so that we can actually build a brand and scale this up. And so our business model is, instead of selling a device to a doctor and say, good luck, doc, figure it out, is to allow doctors to invest with us in a local center, giving them some economic participation in a way that's much more attractive, much more sensible, compliant to all laws, because we're not paying them for the referrals or anything, but they get to, kind of like owning a piece of a surgery center, they get a piece of that action. But then we build our center and we're able to go right to the consumer and build it. And we're investing in some new models too, like an at-home version of the therapy, coupled with similar to what we build in the clinic in terms of the experience that we create for our clients. It's really an equally important part of the therapy. It's about education and community and support to help clients kind of unbundle this complicated world they find themselves in after years of chronic pain. So we want to be able to create an at-home version of this. It's a simplified version and kind of a technology and telemedicine platform that allows our clients at home to have an equally beneficial experience similar to what we do in the clinic. And so if Starbucks is the analogy for our clinics, the analog to what we want to do for at home is probably Peloton, if you or your listeners are familiar with them. And they've proven to be a very effective business for at home exercise in a way that's not just about getting a better exercise bike, but having an experience that makes the user want to use it and engage and, kind of gamify that and get better results and, compliant use. So that's what we want to do. That's where we're headed. And hopefully as we grow this, as we scale it, you talked about crowdfunding. We are actually about to begin a formal what's called a Regulation A+ crowdfunding mechanism, which allows anybody in the world, you don't have to be a rich accredited investor, as little as $500. If chronic pain or opioids or innovative business ideas are of interest to you, you can invest as little as 500, hopefully more if you want. And then we aggregate that capital from the people that we ultimately want to serve anyway. We build that relationship. They are able to economically participate with us, and then we can, continue to build all the things that we want to build.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, when you think of crowdfunding, when I first started hearing about it, it was the Kickstarter, it was, putting money in, or donating,
Yep.
giving money to something, and then you get product back and so forth. But there's this whole other extension of it, even real estate and so forth, when you're actually talking about investing in. It's a great way to invest in programs like this. So that's how the doctors are actually working with you, or is that a separate model?
Well, we have a couple different things. So, if you're a startup business, you probably raise money first from friends and raise money from friends and family. We went through those stages. And then as you start to mature, you start to prove that you actually have something, then you probably go out and try to get venture capital money or angel investor money kind of in larger amounts. And the truth is, because we don't own the technology, because it's kind of an unproven idea that no one else has done before, and because we're building brick and mortar centers that require that we hire people, train people, and retain those people in order for the business to grow, most institutional investors like VC funds don't want to invest in us. They invest, even though they're very complimentary about our mission and our vision, they have certain criteria they have to fit. You have to check box.
You got to own the technology.
Own the technology, and your software scales much easier. It doesn't require the same people like our business does. And so because of that, we haven't found great traction with the VC, market. So we've raised several $1 million from individual angel investors at $25,000 or $50,000 a piece or so, some a little bit larger, and we aggregate that capital. So it's kind of like it's kind of like crowdfunding so far, but it's been so far just for private capital, private or accredited investors is what I want to say. The center models, we open centers, work similar. It's also crowdfunding. So instead of a doctor being imposed with a $100,000 bill for a piece of equipment that they then have to integrate, we allow them to invest a much smaller amount, as little as $10,000. So we aggregate that capital. It's kind of like a smaller version of crowdfunding from these doctors. So that is kind of like that. And then as we get approved by the SEC here for this Regulation A+ offering, then we can openly solicit. We can tell the world we're raising money, which right now is illegal. I have to only communicate with accredited investors about that. And then at that point, anybody can participate as little as $500. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of been a unique approach to capitalization because our business model has been so unique, and it just, hasn't really found the right fit in institutional places, I guess, so far, if you will.
Yeah, got it. Well, I'm going to be doing a series in the new year on how to start your movement. And so this is great because obviously you're doing it right now, and I've done it. And so even a big part of that, of course, is funding in different ways that you can fund your movement after the friends and family has been exhausted.
It gets exhausted pretty quick. And I understand that because, I mean, it's a risk to invest in an early stage business. I mean, there's a lot more that can go wrong than can go right. It's not easy to build a company, and I applaud anybody who chooses to be an entrepreneur and, goes all in and as they say, burns the boats, or, burns the bridges behind them. And because I think entrepreneurship, with the exception of maybe being a parent, is the most amazing experience in school, because it tests you and tries you and grows you in ways that are completely unexpected and pretty remarkable and hard and fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But then I've done this in my life, when you bet the farm, it's not always a good thing, right?
That's
So
right.
especially if you've got a family that you're responsible for, you got to take care of, you got to do it wisely and use money wisely. So this has been great. So what are some of the keys that you would say to scalability? So now you've got the model,
Yeah.
and that's part of it. Obviously, I guess you'd have to have a good model that's scalable. But some of the keys to scalability to be able to grow, like you said, so we can so you can impact millions of people.
Yeah. Well, the key obviously for anything is systems. I mean, you can't scale an individual. You can't scale an idea. You actually have to have a system and a process in place. And if you can, the tighter those processes are refined and replicable, then the easier it is to reproduce them in one location to a second location to one employee to the next employee, and on and on. So we spent the last several years kind of really focusing on refining and learning and adjusting so that we have a pretty high level of confidence about how do we grow. Now, the truth is, opening a couple centers versus opening dozens of centers is a different reality. And so there will always be continued learning. And so I think the next piece of that is just have a learner's mentality and look at failure as not catastrophic, but as a learning opportunity. And I think, one of the real things that differentiates entrepreneurs from other people, probably more sensible people sometimes, is the ability to feel at least somewhat comfortable or tolerant to a level of risk and to put into action something that is imperfect. I think a lot of us have ideas, oh, I'd like to do this, I'd like to do that, but we're waiting for the perfect opportunity, the perfect amount of capital, the perfect life circumstance. The truth is those things don't ever happen. And so if you have a passion and an idea, you got to put it into play. And you might win right out of the gate, you might partially win, you might completely fail. But in any way, putting it into action will teach you. And if it's important enough, even if it's a failure, you'll learn from that, you'll pivot, you'll keep going. And we've had that on and on and on throughout our organization, and sometimes more or less painful ways, but always learning and always, figuring it out and keeping pushing forward. Because we see, for us, it's way more, for me, for our investors, for my partners, for my staff, and for our clients, it's way more than about building a business for the economic return. If it was just for the money, I would have quit a long time ago, because it's been 5 years of, fairly big sacrifices and a lot of hard work. And I think it's because we see the ability to reach people, to change the way individuals' lives are, approached, and then on mass scale, hopefully help hundreds of thousands or millions of people have a better quality of life. It's much more to us than economics. And I think for many entrepreneurs, it has to be something that's, more than money. Yeah.
Yeah, because after a while, that's going to get old, and you'll be like, forget it. I'm going to go do something else, which I can make a whole lot more money a lot faster. I'm not going to bother with this. But one of the things that, as I was listening to you, struck me is, with anything like this, you are, and your team are very passionate about this, and so you're being the catalyst for getting this going. But at some point, you also have to take yourself out of it. And if it's all, you're the magic, but you're not the magic.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the key to that is team. So that's probably the third piece of how you scale it. And fortunately, in the last year, I've been able to start to grow team. We have a chief financial officer. As we had to file with the SEC, we had to go through an audit. We're looking at raising money in the tens of millions of dollars, and then ultimately working towards a public listing and an IPO. And so, we need to have a higher level of sophistication than I frankly am capable to do, or that I'm inclined to want to do. So we have a CFO. We have a great guy who came to us first as an investor. He wrote a significant check, a six-figure check, and then came out of retirement to work basically for free for stock as our chief operating officer. And so he's really kind of more in the day-to-day, kind of helping us refine the process. We have a new chief medical officer. I co-founded the business with a Harvard and MIT trained doctor who's a great individual. But now we have a new chief medical officer who's, she's boarded in anesthesia, she's boarded in pain, and she's an expert in modern pain science. And she's a great, evangelist and advocate to what we're doing, and can speak peer to peer. So building a movement starts with one person pushing the rock, and then, slowly you get another person pushing the rock, and it starts to build. In fact, my COO told me, he said, if you go to a concert and you're sitting there, everyone's on the ground or in chairs watching the concert, and then one weird hippie guy gets up and starts to dance. If he's by himself, he's the one weird hippie guy. But as soon as the next person gets up, then it's like, okay, well, maybe he's not so weird. And then eventually everybody starts to get up and starts to move, right? Nobody wants to necessarily be the very first person. It's a little bit of a lonely place to be, which is where I have been for some time. So starting to get team developed and starting to have more and more doctors coming to us saying, this sounds interesting. And obviously more and more consumers going, tell me more. How do I get my life back? You see it start to happen. And that becomes in itself energizing too, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, the chief job of the CEO is always to sell and to enroll other people in the vision, of course, raise money, all of those things. But
yep.
So you're disrupting an industry that is well entrenched in certain patterns, beliefs. What can people expect? And this is kind of a prelude, as I said, to the series I'm going to be doing in the new year on starting a movement. Is when you're disrupting an industry, what are some of the things people know that it's going to be uncomfortable, but like specifically, what are some of the things that maybe even surprised you, that when you're disrupting an industry?
Well, what has surprised me really is how lonely it is and how hard it is, to be honest. I mean, it is a lonely, hard process. When you're the first weird hippie that's up there dancing and you're doing it for a very long time, you're like, please guys, somebody else dance too. I mean, it is a lonely place to be. And had I known that it would have been that lonely and that hard, I probably wouldn't have had the courage to do it. So I think that's it, be aware of it. In terms of building a movement, I think it's like consistency. And, like I wrote a book, I have a copy of it here. It came out last year, became an Amazon bestseller. Inc. magazine wrote about it last fall. They called it a manifesto and an epic example of how to create a movement, which is obviously very flattering language from a reputable magazine like Inc. And, creating a movement, again, it's, I think the idea is being comfortable in the uncomfortable, like writing the book, putting yourself out there, telling people that you're capable to do something that you have never done before, that no one else has done before, and being consistent with that. And you get rejected far more than you get accepted for maybe a long time. But if you just keep banging that drum, eventually people will start to say, well, he hasn't given up. He hasn't quit. He's still believing this. He's still seeing this. And, oh, look at this. This is a small measure of his validity, or another one, and, you start to stack up some wins. And from my standpoint, I think one of the keys to really creating a movement is, as much as possible, to create alignment rather than creating friction, which is how this could really be perceived, right? We're changing the way chronic pain is understood and treated. That's disrupting the industry. It's changing people's psychology and how they think about something so human and fundamental as pain. So rather than, trying to fight and create friction and muscle my way into it, I've tried to think about how do we create as much alignment as possible? How do we create engagement with the people that ultimately we want to be partners with or serve? And so part of that is the capitalization model, right? Raising money from angels versus institutions. I haven't given up control of the company. And so that's allowed us, even though it's been a much slower process, we've been able to raise money from people who see the vision and they're investing with the desire to see their money be productive and come back to them, but also from a heart space. They're seeing like, wow, this is something that I can see can make a difference because I know somebody in pain or the opioid, whatever, like that's a personal thing for them. Our model of opening centers gives physicians and healthcare professionals a very attractive, appealing way to be engaged with us that doesn't disrupt what they're doing. It's not an affront to them. It's a way to participate in a way that's very comfortable. So there's alignment there. The Regulation A+ crowdfunding mechanism allows the consumer to invest and have a piece of something that ultimately may serve them. And so these small little ways of engagement create alignment versus create friction. And then the other thing too, I think, is thinking about just in your own business, the supply chain as much as, or the value chain as much as possible. Like, all right, so we create affordability and value to the consumer, and obviously a relief, which is what they're searching for, which creates value to them to the point where they want to invest and pay for that service. So now there's revenue coming into us, which allows us to pay suppliers, which allows us to create value, which allows us to attract investors so that we could create returns to those investors. So you have to just think kind of like less about your own self and more about how does this benefit other people? How do you enroll, to use a word you used before, other people into this that's going to serve them and excite them too?
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Alignment and the benefit, it's always looking at who is this going to benefit the most and how can it benefit the people that I needed to benefit to come on board. This is great. Brendon, thank you so very much. I really appreciate it. We're going to make sure there's a link to that book Radiant Relief, a case for a better solution to chronic pain. And you actually have that book is available in PDF and Kindle, you said, for free.
Yep.
It's also they can get a copy of the hard copy. They just need to pay the shipping. And so we'll make sure there's a link in the show notes to that. Also, radiantpainrelief.com is your website. And I encourage the listeners and viewers to go and check that out and see. Certainly, like you said, there's so many people that are actually experiencing chronic pain. So for yourself, but even just looking at what they're doing so that you can learn from it. You can learn from what, the challenges that they've gone through and the research that they've done and the testing that they've done to be able to learn how you can start your own movement, learn from them so you can save yourself some of that heartache. And realizing that it's a lonely journey, you might be the only hippie.
Yeah.
That was a great visual there. Most of us don't want to be that hippie standing out. We want to be, but we do want to be the one afterwards who says, "Yeah, I got all these people that could come along with me."
Right.
But where does that start? Is being the first one to stand up, and
you got to feel the music, baby.
Yeah, that's awesome. Brendon, thank you again so very much. We appreciate you, and to our listeners and viewers. I trust it's been inspiring and enlightening, and I love to hear your stories. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com. You can find us there. Reach out to me through our contact page. Of course, we're all over social media as well. And if you like this, please leave us a rating and review on your favorite channel platform where you listen to podcasts. We appreciate that. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.